Hey folks, Mrs. Gifford here today, and I am going to talk to you about order of operations and using square roots and absolute value. And this is just a continuation of what we've started talking about with order of operations, and we're going to focus specifically on square roots and absolute values. So if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and pause this video and get your paper labeled, and we will go on from here. So in your vocabulary section, if you could turn to the S page for square root, the first term that we want to talk about is a square root does look like this, very similar to the division symbol. However, it's got this extra little tag right here. And square root just means to find what number times itself makes the number under the radical symbol. So for example, if we had square root of, let's say, 9, what number times itself makes 9? Right, if you said 3, that's the correct answer. So the square root again is just what number times itself gives you that number. The second one is absolute value. And the absolute value just talks about the distance a number is from 0 on a number line. And the absolute value symbol looks like this. It looks like an equal sign tipped up on its end. An example of this could be like -4. Imagine that you're standing on -4. How many steps would it take you to get up to 0? It would be 4. Notice this answer is positive even though the number inside the absolute value symbol is negative. That's because we're talking about distance, and unless if there isn't anything out front, whatever's inside here, it's always going to be this positive number. So, after you get those in your vocab section, let's move on to our first examples. And why don't you go ahead and hit pause real quick and copy the problems down, and then we will walk through how to solve each of these problems. So here we go. We are going to follow the order of operations. This first one is 7 plus 9 times 2 divided by 5. And while these look a little different, these square things right here are called brackets. Brackets are grouping symbols, so we're going to do the same thing we would do if they were parentheses, and we're going to go inside first. Thinking about those order of operations, parentheses, ooh, that yellow is really hard to read, isn't it? Parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, and subtract. So we're going to use parentheses or grouping symbols. We're going to solve this problem inside. We need to do 9 times 2 first, which is what? Okay, 18 is right. And so we're going to do that here. And I'm going to put the brackets around it, and I'm going to bring down my divided by 5. Now notice I'm showing my work with each step so that in the event I get the final answer wrong, then I am going to be able to figure out where the mistake is. Continuing inside, 7 plus 8 is what number? If you're thinking 25, that's perfect. And we're going to divide by 5. All we have left is 5. So again, brackets, these square things are grouping symbols. Let's go down here to example B. We have a negative times the quantity of 6 minus 9 squared. So we've got a bunch of things going on here. The first thing that I want you to imagine is that there's actually a -1 out front of the parentheses, and anytime you see a number next to any of these grouping symbols, parentheses, brackets, square roots, absolute value, I want you to think of the fact that it means to multiply. Okay, so we're going to keep that in mind, but we're going to focus inside the parentheses because, like I said, we just talked about the fact we have to do grouping symbols first. 6 minus 9, if you want to consider changing subtraction to addition and changing that positive 9 to negative. I'm going to put this -1 again, and 6 plus -9 is -3. And then I think, okay, following my order of operations, what comes next? And it is going to be the exponents. One of the things that I want you to be careful of here, a common mistake, is that some people would say that this would become -6. -3 squared actually means to do -3 times itself. And negative times a negative is a positive, and 3 times 3 is 9. So I'm going to bring that positive 9 down here. Again, -3 times -3. And what is -1 times 9? right? It gets us that -9. Again, anytime you see a negative sign out front, treat it like there's a 1 there, an invisible 1. Do the operations inside any grouping symbols, and then follow the order of operations. So let's move on to our last 2 examples with this lesson. And again, we're going to simplify each expression. Again, if you haven't done so yet, pause the video, copy the problems down, and then we will chat momentarily. All right, folks, as we've talked about, this symbol right here, this vertical lines, these are called absolute values. And again, based on the vocabulary terms, it's talking about the distance a number is from 0. But we have to simplify inside this absolute value first. And I also want to point this out to you. We just talked about it in the previous one. What does it mean when there's a number next to a grouping symbol? If you're thinking multiplication, you are spot on. So I'm going to bring that -4 down, and I'm just going to put a little dot here to remind me that I need to multiply. And what is -5 plus 2? Think of owing somebody $5. You gave them $2. You still owe them 3. Okay? Now from here, some of you may be thinking, okay, this is where we do the exponent. Not quite. We have to completely simplify what's inside that radical. We are not going to do the negative or use the -4 yet. And then we just talked about it. If you're standing on -3 and have to walk to 0, how many steps would that take? It would be 3. So the absolute value of 3 is +3. And now, just like the previous page, we have to do 3 squared, which we just got done talking about is 9. And then I need to do -4 times 9. And a positive times a negative is a negative. So the answer to this one is -36. So last example, and then we will move on to our summary. We have a -√49 plus the quantity of 6 minus 7 to the 3rd power. We have a couple of different things going on here. First of all, I notice that there's kind of 2 separate problems within one. We have 6 minus 7 to the 3rd power, and we have this -√49. Now notice 49 is the only thing under that square root symbol, not the 6 minus 7 to the 3rd. So I need to focus on what number times itself makes 49. It is 7. And remember, we just talked about there being an invisible 1 right here. So then we have -1 times 7. And I'm going to bring my plus down. And then I'm also going to take care of this 6 minus 7 inside the parentheses. And 6 minus 7 is -1. So from here we need to follow our order of operations. Again, I can simply do this -1 times 7, which is -7, plus -1 to the 3rd power, again, is not -3. It means to do -1 times -1 times -1. -1 times -1 is +1, and +1 times -1 is -1. So I'm going to bring my -1 right here. Whoa, that's a really big negative sign. Again, I'm going to make that just a little bit shorter. And here is my -1. And then the last thing we have left to do is to add them together. And anytime you add 2 negative integers together, you keep the negative sign and add the digits. So we have -8 here. So again, folks, this is all about simplifying expressions. Really, the only thing different with this today is that we have these absolute value symbols right here, or excuse me, square root symbols right here, and the absolute value symbols. But we treat them just like we do parentheses. So let's move on to that next slide, because now it's time for you to draw that line across your page and write your summary about this lesson. Again, make sure you use complete sentences, write a really good paragraph about what you learned, make sure you make up your own example, and then challenge yourself to come up with a question. That's it, folks. Have a great evening.